Hello, everybody. Disasters impact different people differently. Have you heard this phrase, raise your hand? Actually, raise your hand if you think that this makes sense. Okay, well now we've established that you can raise your hands, sort of, but we don't know if you know what this actually means. So what I would like to do in the next minute is to find out if we know what social vulnerability means. And for that, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand when you think the correct answer is higher than the number I'm going to show on the screen. And please, let's keep up with the Ignite pace here. Do you think that the lives lost in the Indian Ocean tsunami were 1,000 or more? Please raise your hands. I don't think I see enough hands. In fact, it was 300,000. Now, let me ask you a second question that you might not know. Do you know how many of those were women and children? Do you think it was higher than 200,000 or 66% of those? Are you answering the question over there? In fact, it was 240,000. 80% of those were women and children. So let's pause the quiz for a minute and think about this. We already know that women and children are more vulnerable to disasters. If we had reduced the vulnerability of 80% of the victims of the disaster in advance, could we have made a difference? So this is what we want to talk about. I also want to talk about another dimension of vulnerability, poverty. We all know that poverty increases vulnerability, but do we know how pervasive poverty really is? For instance, 14% of people in the district of Andhra Pradesh in India move out of poverty every year. But some people fall back into poverty. Do you think that when you subtract the number that falls back from that number that moves out, the total is higher than 2%? Raise your hands. I see very few hands. In fact, it is 2% because 12% of those fall back into poverty. So the net move out of poverty is just 2%, which means that people keep flowing in and out of poverty. And half of that 12% falls into poverty because of drought and other climate and environmental related shocks. So what does this mean for managing disasters? It means that we should be able to identify and mapping social vulnerability better, but we should also be better at addressing social vulnerability in advance. And it's challenging. We've all seen in the presentations that there are huge challenges in obtaining data and identifying individuals. For instance, today, do you know how many countries actually don't have access to microdata or data at an individual level that would allow to identify socially vulnerable groups? Raise your hand if you think it's more than 50. Yeah, very good. Yes, it's exactly 65. 65 countries do not have this data online today. But not everything is bad news. Data tools are improving. We're seeing innovations in mobile technologies, big data that are helping us close that gap. We're also seeing vulnerability assessment tools incorporating social vulnerability more clearly. And we're also seeing progress in the policy front. For instance, a country like Ethiopia, who's been exposed to severe droughts that have caused famines in the past, we see that in the 2011 and 2015 droughts that have been really dire, and the situation is dire by no means, but we see that thanks to programs like social protection programs, the famine has not occurred. And that's good progress. So tomorrow, in the session, we want to talk about social vulnerability. We want to talk about the challenges in characterizing, identifying these groups, and reaching them. We want to talk about why this matters, and we want to talk about what specific groups are at risk. And we also want to see how all of this links with that word that we hear so much today, resilience. We want to look at assessment tools and data challenges and opportunities and innovations, at policies and programs that can help us address and reduce social vulnerability in advance of disasters. We have a great panel. Estefan is going to talk to us about an analysis of social vulnerability and resilience. Krunoslav is going to talk to us about a methodology for assessing vulnerability in Croatia. Risha is going to talk about social vulnerability of children and youth in the Philippines. Till is going to talk about a big data study in the Paris innovations. And I'm going to talk about addressing vulnerability through social protection. This has been all put together by our session leads, who are the UNDP Champignon, Rashid Sharma, and Angelica Plants. And we really hope to see you there tomorrow at 4 p.m. room Cape Town, putting people first, and we'd really like to discuss how to make a difference. Thank you very much.